Hey y'all, welcome back to Roots and Refuge Farm. I wanted to give a little bit of context for this video because I know I've been doing daily vlogs documenting our experience post-Hurricane Helene, and I knew this would kind of be a little out of left field being in the middle of that. For an update, we're still without power, but we're finding our stride. We're doing great. We appreciate you all checking in on us. We're just plugging along. It looks like we're going to be at least another handful of days without power, but it's getting easier the longer we go. Interestingly, this conversation that you are about to watch, my friend Morgan and I actually touched on the topic of, do we live without power to prepare for being without power? And I thought it was funny that now we're actually dealing with that adjustment in real time. And it is definitely changing some ways I plan about things, but more about that later. I went up to New England, I don't know, last weekend, 2 weeks ago. It's all running together. And I was a speaker at the Homesteaders of New England conference, had a wonderful time. While I was up there, since I was only 2 hours away from my dear friend Morgan's farm, Goldshaw Farm in Vermont, I decided to add a little extra time to my trip and go get to see his farm for the first time and get to spend some time with he and his wife. Morgan and I became content creators around the same time, and so we have been friends now for the last 7 years as we create content in the same space. At this point is one of my very closest friends. We talk very regularly, helps me a lot in my creative process, and I'm so thankful for him. I loved getting to spend this time with him, and while I was there I asked if he'd be willing to shoot a podcast with me. Never filmed a podcast before. I'm not I'm not super technically inclined, to be completely honest. That's why my videos are very raw. But Morgan is excellent at video, and so he actually recorded this podcast, filmed it, and edited this video for you guys to be able to see. This was on my podcast last week, so you may have already heard it, but I wanted to be able to put it here if you are not a podcast listener, so you could check it out. So I will put a link to Morgan's channel down below. Also, if you happen to not have heard of him, he posts great content showing his farming experience up in New England, and it's just super fun. I think he's awesome, and I hope y'all like this conversation. Hey there, darlings. Welcome back to the Roots and Refuge podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Sowards. My friends call me Jess, and I hope you will too. And here on my podcast, we talk about all things homesteading, growing food by raising animals, growing gardens, preserving, preparing, and enjoying that food, as well as trying to live a little more mindfully in relationship with each other and with the earth. Today, I am coming to you from a place I never have even been before. Normally, I'm at my office. I'm on the farm. Today, I'm in the back corner of a pasture in Vermont with my very, very dear friend, Morgan Gold. Thank you for being on my podcast, and thank you for having me on your farm.
Thanks for coming. I mean, I feel like we've been talking about doing this for years.
Yeah, I mean, probably 8 years.
Yeah, and so just to finally have you up here, just be able to hang out for a couple of days, just it's awesome.
It is awesome. So many of you may have heard me mention Morgan Morgan, so many of my podcasts spur off of our Tuesday conversations.
Yeah, right.
So there are so many podcasts that I'm like, so I was talking to my friend Morgan, and then I go verbally process for an hour about the topics that we have talked about.
I'm honored.
Yeah, so Morgan and I both started content creation kind of pretty seriously the same year, 2018.
Yep.
And we met, I don't know, in that world. I don't know if it was the Facebook group or
that summer somewhere coming across each other.
Yeah.
Somewhere. Yeah.
And we became friends, did a collaboration going through a seed catalog back in 2018.
Well, actually, that was because it was January 2019.
Okay, 2019. So it's that first year.
Yep.
And after, I guess the rest is history, you could say. We've been...
Well, I mean, it's one of those things because it's you know how it's weird, right? There's parasocial relationships where it's you see somebody on the internet and you're you get familiar with them. There's creators that I watch and I'm like, wow, they're so cool.
Yeah.
You almost start to think they're your friend. And then at the same time, though, you start to have friends who create content too, who it's kind of part parasocial, then part friendship.
It is.
And it develops over the years, but then also you do other things in person, or you meet at a conference or an event, or I come down to your place and it's just No, then it becomes like just legit friendships and yeah.
Well, it took me about an hour and a half yesterday of being around Morgan to like stop reaching out like
physical human.
Like patting his shoulder and I'm like, you're real.
Not just a Google Calendar conversation.
I mean, we've been really good friends for a while now. We've been around each other. You've been to my farm. We've been to multiple conferences together. But the majority of our relationship has happened through a screen. We talk for an hour and a half every week.
Yeah.
And I know, it's just wild to be in person.
It's like deep conversations.
Yeah, like really deep conversations. And yesterday, when you walked up, there was a couple standing there that were at the conference. We were here for the Homesteaders of New England conference. I came up, my friend Jack invited me, and it was wonderful. And I couldn't be 2 hours away from Goldshaw Farm and not come spend time with Morgan. But when Morgan walked up, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was so excited to see him. And I turned around, and this couple was standing there, and they were like, you're really flustered. And I was like, I know, keep telling you guys the fangirl effect is not just for people you don't know. When you are used to engaging with someone through a screen and you meet them in person, it's a surreal feeling.
Well, the feeling I would describe is it's like seeing a relative you haven't seen in so long. You're like, yes, oh my gosh. Or like getting back together with friends that you haven't seen in a decade. It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, there's a lot of emotion.
So I'm trying to think. Last time we actually hung out in person.
It was when you came to my... No,
it was fall 2022, I think.
Yeah.
So, I mean, still, even that's like 2 years probably from now.
That's true.
It's crazy.
And we've talked, a collective... I mean, just...
Hundreds of hours.
Hundreds of hours since then. So that's really cool. Well, Morgan is homesteading in beautiful Vermont.
Yeah.
Has a really cool story and had his original YouTube channel, Goldshaw Farm. If you are not familiar with that, it's fantastic. I love watching his videos. He's a great storyteller. My kids love watching your videos. You do such a great job making content that is wholesome and grounding and really allows people to enjoy the animals, and I know a lot of people in the dreaming phase love that. But more recently, you started a new channel.
Yep.
Interestingly, Morgan and I get on our Tuesday call, which we have every week, and at the very end, we at the same time say, I have to tell you something. And I'm like, you go first. And he goes, I started a new YouTube channel. I was like, you have got to be kidding me. I was literally about to tell you that I started a new YouTube channel.
Well, but it's almost like convergent evolution, right? Where like puffins and penguins, even though they look and behave extremely similar, they are completely unrelated bird species. But because they're responding to similar environments, they do the same thing. I actually think that because I feel like the weeks before we had that conversation, we were both talking about we love what we do, but there's other things we want to do.
Right. That doesn't fit in the... And
it was like a feeling we were both feeling. And so it's like the idea that like we logically make that next step conclusion.
Makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
So the Farmer's Table was born the same exact week as Stories Told by Morgan Gold, which is Morgan's newer channel. Yeah. We're coming up on a year on our new channels this fall. We started it. We didn't start putting anything on there, but we started them.
Yeah, it was last fall. Yeah, you're right. Wow, God.
Isn't that crazy?
Time go.
Yeah. And recently you did a video that... I mean, I was kind of there through the process of the creation of it. You spent your entire summer on it. But I think that it would be a really great topic to discuss here on my podcast with my people because we've talked about it a lot. I've talked about it a lot, namely because you and I have talked about it a lot. So I came and talked to them about it. But Morgan did a video. Actually, why don't you tell them about it? The 4-hour video, the saga.
Well, the goal was 4 hours. It ended up only being 3 hours.
Okay.
But so...
I watched the whole thing and it went by in a flash. Like it took me like 2 days to like clip through it, but it was so good.
Well, so here in Vermont, there were back in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, this couple by the name of Helen and Scott Nearing. And they are like the OG homesteaders. And like, if you think about the back to the land movement of like the 1960s and 70s, they were some of the most inspirational people and like kind of the biggest like mentors for that generation of people. And they were just a couple who were living in New York and got fed up with the rat race during the Great Depression and decided to buy some land in the middle of Vermont and like set up shop. And they wrote these books, the Good Life books. Like I said, inspired generations. They talked so much about exiting the like mainstream capital system and just living off of 4 hours a day of work. And like that's how they could do it. And it inspired so many people, but so many of those people they inspired got frustrated because they were like, we can't do it like the Nearings can do it. We are struggling to make ends meet. We're not able to, we're burning ourselves out. Like all of these things, the Back to the Land movement generation, like the hippies, like the 60s and 70s people, baby boomers were experiencing. And then after the Nearings die, like Helen died when she was in her 90s, Scott died at 100. They both like turned out to have like trust funds and insurance, and they were making all this money from like inheritances and stuff.
The thing was bankrolled.
Yeah, everything was bankrolled. And it was like this thing of like, they basically deceived people and made so many people feel bad about themselves because they positioned of living off the land when they were, I mean, they were producing all their own food. They were doing like all of the things that like kind of in that way, but there was like this secret edge that they all had. Yeah. And that was always like an interesting story to me, because there were some people that like when I was first exploring the idea of like starting the farm, they inspired me. And so like I wanted to talk about it, because then when I look at them and I look at parallels and like people who are out there trying to homestead, and like people we met yesterday at Homesteaders in New England. And then I look at like people like us where we're producing our own food and we're living kind of off the land, but then we also have this outside income source that really helps keep everything going. Yeah. I just saw a lot of parallels, and so I really wanted to explore that idea.
It was a great video, and it's a great discussion. And I have discussed, can you really live off the land? And I try to be very transparent about this, because I want to say to people, hey, it looks like I homestead full time because you don't see the 30 plus hours a week that goes into production, editing, the 15 hours a week that goes into administration and all these things. I mean, like Jeremiah and I both work full-time jobs with our content creation business, as well as the other businesses we now have coming off of that. And so, yeah, we probably actually only have to do farm chores. I mean, farm chores don't take a terribly long time. I mean, we cover everything on our farm in a few hours a day, maybe more during the high garden season where we're having to put a lot of work in there. But that is not the part of our job that actually takes all the time. It's the part that makes the money.
Completely. And I mean, for us, especially being here in New England, it changes too, depending on the time of year. Like, I mean, we blitzed through chores this morning, and so usually it'll take longer. Like, I didn't set up the second cattle paddock for the day, but like, it's still probably an hour and a half. And then typically on a summer day, I'll work on like a project. But then in the winter, it's less than an hour a day. Right. Like, it's nothing. Like, make sure everybody's got fresh water, drop hay for the cattle, like feed for the birds. That's it. Yeah.
And I mean, that's pretty much for us. In the summer, I mean, if you count in preservation and canning and all the different things that you'll spend the day doing, we do projects in the winter more, because in the summer it's really too hot. But yearly it changes by season, but that's not our full-time job. And so people are like, are you homesteading full-time? And I'm like, I mean, yes. I mean, we both work on our farm full-time, but we have this, it's subsidized essentially, like we have this business that pays for it that allows us to not leave. And I want to be transparent about that, because I want to paint a realistic picture. Because when we were homesteading without the content creation income, there was a lot more hustle. There was a lot more side jobs and figuring things out to try to make it work. And we were also really, really broke. So that's the reality of doing it.
Completely. I mean, like, so when I got started too, like when we both started, we were in different situations. Like, you were kind of like in a homemaker role, more or less. So you're always home, but you were just trying to kind of make ends meet for your family. I had a 50-hour-a-week job that was an hour each way commute from the farm when I was first starting the farm. And so it was like I had more resources, but I had way less time. And like those trade-offs of struggle that you have at the beginning, like now I don't have. I mean, everything I do, or almost everything I do, is right here on the farm. And so it's a luxury that I didn't have then. And I personally, like when I think about like my videos and I show like a Goldshaw farm video where it's like, hey, we're going to do a project today. Like, I'm capturing a beehive and I'm going to like help set up some things for the cattle. Like, okay, I'm not showing my entire life. I'm not showing the fact that like I can make all this work, not because of the beef I'm selling or the honey I'm producing, but it's like the content that I'm making. And for me, that always kind of creates this like imposter syndrome feeling, again, being a first generation farmer, being like growing up in suburbs kind of thing, and like wanting to do this and thinking the image is, oh, you're just living off the land and you're out on the side of a Vermont mountain and that's just how you live. Like, I feel like I've had to do a lot of work myth busting myself to feel okay with how like things work.
And how it's presented.
And I can't even imagine for other folks, like how they must feel like when they scroll through their Instagram feed and see stuff, and like, how do you confront what you're seeing versus how you feel like your place looks?
Yeah. I mean, I think sharing transparently is really important, because expectations are, greatly going to affect how you feel about something on the other end. My thing is that really at no point in history that's, recorded. I mean, there was a time that people literally, like, they were just small farmers and they didn't have a lot. They lived very seasonally and stuff like that. But really, as people have begun having a higher standard of living of what they expect, like we want to wear shoes most of the year, and things like that, people have kind of stepped out of the phase of just being really small farmers that didn't have very much at all. They want to have a vehicle. They want to have their kids in sports. They want to have things. It raises the standard, and therefore there needs to be an income. And since there has been that standard of living, most people haven't homesteaded full time. Mostly you homesteaded or you farmed to grow your food, and then you worked to cover the rest of your needs.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think a lot of people will identify with this idea of being a kid and reading like the Little House, Laura Ingalls kind of series, and like seeing that and being like, oh, that's how you're homesteading. That's how you're living off the land. I think people completely neglect the fact that, number one, Pa was always leading the family into financial ruin. Like, Pa was most of the time working as a farmhand or a carpenter to help support the family. That they kept going bust and having to go further west and finding new plots of land and taking new plots of land to actually make it all work. Yet people kind of look at the romanticism of, oh, they were just able to exist in that land off the prairie. That's how they did it. It's like, not really.
Yeah. I wonder, yesterday we were at Homesteaders of New England, and what is Rich's last name? Rich.
Giordano.
Yeah, Giordano. So there's a guy named Rich Giordano. You're not going to find him on the internet. He's not doing any sort of online content, but this guy is a wealth of knowledge. I sat with him for probably 3 hours after the first day and just asked a million questions about native perennials and edible perennials. And anyway, he said something that I found really to probably be the most true thing as far as being resourceful and wanting to be on the homestead as much as possible, wanting to stop the 50-hour-a-week job that you're having to commute to. People are like, how do I make it work? He said, my goal is not to make money off my farm. My goal is to not have to spend money. And I think that's probably the healthiest approach to come to. And I mean, even us this summer, we've really been auditing and being like, we really want to scale back. We want to cut things down to a place that we can have more time and more peace. And we won't produce as much. But my goal is, where can I not have to spend money? Because I think that's really what a homestead can offer.
Yeah, I mean, I almost look at it, it's like any business, right? You've got your kind of top line, like your revenue, and what are you generating from a revenue perspective, and what are your expenses? And that ultimately leads to what's your profit.
Right.
And so you've got to think about, you have the ability to control either side of that equation to make your life work. I think the other thing in my eyes is, it's how do we get more and more out of this? Are you doing this? Yes or no? And more recognizing it's all sitting on a spectrum. And I think, completely ignoring having any connection to where your food comes from and just saying, I just get the, styrofoam pack in the cooler at the grocery store. And that's your thought of where does food come from doesn't even go any further than that. I think that's very unhealthy.
Yeah.
But then also to say 99% of everything we consume is entirely produced from this, 160 acre parcel of land. That's also really unhealthy. Yeah. And it's just finding, for you personally and your family, what's the right spot somewhere in between those two extremes that works best for you guys.
With your other goals. Our conversations brought a lot of freedom to me because I really struggled with, I have a kid that comes up with this burgeoning baseball talent. We've never really been much of a sports family. Some of my other kids have played sports with the school for a season. But Ben ends up blooming with this he's crazy good at baseball. And it started with us in Little League. Other parents are coming over to us being like, hey, your child is very good. Other coaches start coming. They start trying to recruit him to teams. And we don't know that our kid is really good because, we know baseball-ish, but we don't know.
Yeah, I think I've had more conversations with Jeremiah about Star Trek than I've ever had about baseball.
For sure. We're not sports people in that sense. Jeremiah's always liked sports, but baseball is his least favorite sport for the longest time. Anyway, so we start working and we get Ben a trainer because he loves it. He's passionate about it. And I think that as a parent, when you have children that have a passion, it's kind of part of the responsibility of raising them to steward that. And we're making this space for it, but it means whole weekends at baseball fields, and it means packing food and trying to make it work. And it's been kind of dividing for me. And there was a part of me that was like, well, I can't do this because I'm a homesteader. And you were actually the one that was like, why can't you be a homesteader that has a kid that plays baseball? Like, where's the middle ground? It's not black and white.
Right.
And I think that there is kind of, again, this unhealthy idea that's presented when you're only seeing the content people make to portray their farm. There are a lot of other aspects of their life, and you can do both. Living off the land, if your idea is, well, I've got to grow 99% of your food, you're never going to leave your farm. That's hard.
Yeah, completely. Well, I mean, all right, you know me very well. One of my favorite things, stories above all else, and probably arguably like one of the characteristics you assigned to me like first and foremost off the top of your mind. I actually think the stories we tell ourselves are sometimes those things that are actually really unhealthy, because you have the perfection of a good narrative confronted with the truth of reality. And like, while they're both fine in and of their own right, sometimes the relationship between those two things can be like wicked toxic.
Yes. Yeah. Nothing ruins a good story like the truth.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, and like, so when I talk about like saying like kind of my personal struggle, like imposter syndrome, it's like, well, I feel like for my folks who watch my videos, like it's really my job to make sure they feel like they have a good, satisfying story.
Yeah.
And it's like trying to walk that line between give good people story without inundating them with all unnecessary details, but then also not misleading to the point where those unnecessary details, some of them might have been actually necessary. Yeah. Yeah. And that's hard.
Yeah, it is a hard balance, you know, and trying to like share that it's not all rainbows. It's not all easy. It's hard. Because I really want people to homestead. I actually really want people to take responsibility for their food, to grow what they can, to plug into a local community. And I mean, the localization of food, I think, is really the only sensible solution for the broken food system. But if people are going into it with a very unrealistic expectation, it's not going to have longevity. And so I think these conversations are important. You know what I always think of? This is so silly, but I like have a filter in my mind when I consume content, and it's like my realism filter. So anytime I see somebody, and I'm an apron linen dress girl, this is not me hating on this niche. Like, I am this niche, you know, like probably not so much because I don't curate anything, you know, I'm like, here's the real thing. Yeah, there's dishes in the sink. But when I see shorts or reels or videos that come up that are like the perfect golden light, the perfect scored sourdough loaf, and everything is so perfect, you know, the image that always comes to my mind is like a realism check. Have you ever been laying on your couch looking at your phone and you accidentally turn the front facing camera on and it's like looking down the most unflattering angle,
my
and I'm
chin. Dear God, my chins.
Chins, yeah, like it's always chins, and it's like I have the image of whatever woman I'm looking at with her perfect thing, and I'm like, she looked like that sometime today. Like, that's my realism filter.
Yeah, I mean, honestly,
simmer down.
That actually would be a really good just like, TikTok or real video in general of like, you basically have split screen, and it's like one side of the screen is the front facing and the other side's the back facing while you're doing the thing. Like, yeah, because I think people would realize, oh, we all have way more boogers and nose hair than we think.
I mean, we're all just humans, and I love romanticizing things. I could write 18 poems right now sitting on this corner of your pasture. Yeah. I mean, like the golden light, the beautiful spider webs illuminated, the raindrops on the branches. I mean, we are in probably one of the most beautiful places in the earth right now. But it's also the fact that this is real life that has these beautiful moments. I think that's what makes it worthy and valuable, is that at some point today, we're going to have moments that are not picturesque. And that's actual humanity. I don't want to just see the highlights because...
Right. Like, so like, for example, like, yeah, this is, you know, fog dancing in the distance and the golden light and the dew. But then, like, all right, let me take you down to the bottom of the barn so I can, like, fill some, like, 5-gallon plastic buckets full of feed to, like, feed the animals. Like, that ain't pretty. Like, that's just, like, ugly and disorganized.
But the cool thing for me is, and when like what you said, it's not yes or no. Like, homesteading is on a spectrum. You're doing it to a certain degree, depending on what works with your life, what works with the season of your life. And for me, when you learn to embrace the whole thing, okay, I'm going to have to figure out a way to make money, you know, like some way. And maybe you don't stay in the corporate job. Maybe you do begin doing resourceful things. Maybe you learn to live off of less. You can get on your farm and homestead more or less more than you have been by, as you said, changing the bottom line or the top line.
Yeah.
But I am wooed by walking in the mudroom and seeing the boots all lined up. Like that's not necessarily the space that you're like, oh, I want to frame this. But to me, I love all the aspects of the homestead. I love the spiders that are all clinging all over the side-by-side in the morning and all the things that aren't as picturesque as the back 40 corner of the pasture.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's, and here's why. And like, it's funny, as you were saying, just like talking about the mudroom. So like, one of the biggest fights my wife and I consistently have is the state of our mudroom, because and probably for other people in parts of the country, they're like, mudroom, so, particularly in Vermont, it's a very standard thing to have a room where you're taking off your coats and boots and everything and actually getting into the house because, when you've got snow and everything, it makes it awfully messy. And so we have this very good old school mudroom in the house, and it's chaos because it's the place that I transitioned from the farm to kind of the serenity we try to keep with our house as a whole. And it's messy, it's cluttered. I have all sorts of gear and camera equipment and farm equipment. Like it's the landing zone. And there's a certain measure of vulnerability when you show that to people. Yeah. And I think generally speaking, look, we're close friends, so I feel okay about it. But generally speaking, it's harder to do because that sense of shame that often comes with it, because you're comparing yourself so much to all of these other folks that you're seeing in your feeds.
I just want to blast through it, though. I mean, and I know that I'm like a tenacious, let's blast through everything that's holding people back. But I want to blast through the fact that so many people apologize to me. People come to my farmers markets and they pull out packaged food and they're like, well, it was a road trip. I'm like, you just told me you drove 6 hours to come to this farmer's market. Please do not apologize to me for feeding your child a packaged food. I do that too, it's just not, it's not the every day. That's my goal, is to try to get away from the styrofoam packs of food at the store. It's trying to take responsibility, but just because you don't see that part of my life doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Right.
And it exists less now than it did 10 years ago. It exists less now than it did 5 years ago. But I want to blast through the wall of hey, there are messes. I lay on the couch looking at my phone with my double chin, everybody has that moment of oh gosh, there are all of these absolutely average moments in homesteading. And the fact that we're still doing it, to me, is what makes it beautiful. Well, it's real.
Yeah. And I think, if I'm thinking about the blast through it part, I think the only way to do it is to, when you're sensing that in yourself, you're sensing that sense of shame in this is what I'm doing, or this is where I'm at right now for this thing, confront it and talk to a close friend about it. And I think for folks who are even listening to this, right, the more you can confront that and the more you can put a name to it, that's the way you get around it, versus just being oh, this is the thing I crammed the back deep dark recesses of my brain closet.
Yeah. Well, and I think finding the expression that works for you is only possible if you can actually confront yourself. If you can have the conversation with yourself of, what do I need? What are my goals? What are my expectations? Maybe the romantic farm thing really woos you and you want to experience that. You can experience that while also having other things that you do. It's not all or nothing. And all or nothing is not sustainable. And I think so much of what is portrayed through media, it's just not, it is a highlight reel. We talk about that. And it's not that the moments aren't honest. The beautiful moment scoring the sourdough in the linen apron, that really happens. Those are beautiful moments.
Or you take that piece of bread out of the oven, you're like, whoa, look at this. It looks like it could be in a, bakery in France.
I know, and you're dropping feed on a foggy morning for your chickens and moving the cows, and they're just majestic this morning. Those are the most majestic creatures, these Highland cows in the fog.
Right. Well, and that's actually a perfect example, right? Because that is something I experience every day. And I was telling you that we have foggy mornings like the one we had. It's probably about 2/3 of the days in the summer here look like that. And so that experience that we just had moving the cattle, totally normal. That is my usual routine. Yeah. Not manufactured at all. Not even. No. And it is even now, even though I see it so routinely, it's this is pretty magical. I feel very lucky to be in a life where this is my standard routine. And so you can show that. And then, I think because people will only see that because that's the image that will capture attention, and people will be like, wow, that's amazing. they don't see the other stuff, or you don't see the other stuff, or the algorithm doesn't promote the other stuff, that it makes it much harder to like share that with other people and give that balanced perspective.
Well, it's like this. I mean, I have the Farmer's Table. I have the cooking show. And I will come across sometimes in Facebook groups, you know, you'll find people talking about you and your content when you do what we do. And I'll see where people will be like, hey, what's an account that they grow all of their own food? And I am always thrown out in those accounts. People, oh yeah, Roots and Refuge, they grow all their own food and they have a lot of kids, so it's a lot of food. And I'm like, who told you that? I've literally told people on average throughout the year, we're at about 70% maybe. And there are times that it's more or less. Like there are seasons we do a lot of baking and I don't grow flour. So like, I mean, there are times that it's less than that. There are times that it's more.
I mean, yeah, we're the same. Like, yeah, it's like this time of year in like September. Yeah, it's probably up at 80%. Like come March, it's probably maybe 50%.
Right.
And it's like, that's the swing that you have.
And could we survive off of it? This is the thing. Like when the survival conversation comes up, that's not what's driving me. Now, here's the thing. I want to thrive. I want to eat food that's better than what's at the grocery store. The quality's better. The enjoyment's better. It's better for my body to work hard. Like the pride in it is better. I love the life. I love the foggy mornings and the joy of doing it. But a lot of it is preference. Like I still like to eat fish. And there are some things I have access to now being in South Carolina, but like I like to eat salmon. And so I purchase salmon. Yeah. And, I sometimes need a fast dinner on a baseball night. So I try to order them well. Like I try to make good decisions, but like I don't make a Farmer's Table video when I'm dumping a bag of Butcher Box chicken nuggets on a baking pan. Like that's not what I'm doing.
What you gotta do, yeah.
You don't need a video for that. The instructions on the back: 7 to 9 minutes, 425 degrees. So like, and so when people are like they grow all their own food, and I'm like, we grow a lot of our food. We are real homesteaders, because then the argument comes up of, oh, they're not really homesteaders.
Yeah.
And I'm like, pretty sure I milked a goat this morning. Like, pretty sure the cows are real. I did step and poop this afternoon, like.
Well, I mean, the unhealthiness of like Reddit subreddits and like, Facebook comment groups that like you can just see, it's like, just like, that just doesn't help anybody.
I definitely do not Google myself. Don't do it.
Yeah, no, I gave that up a long time ago. I mean, just like for folks to listen, just Google me, Goldshop Farm, and like look at the words that get suggested afterwards.
Yeah.
It's like, people suggesting I'm getting divorced, or people like talking about fake or Homestead, or like the war with hound hunters, like all of those things. Like those are the things that will come up. War with a dog breeder I had. Like it's like those become the things people talk about.
It is wild. I mean, and I just think that there is this human tendency to want to eke out whatever threat may be there. Like we're constantly looking for what the threats are. That's just our nature, like honestly, go watch any animal on your farm and they're extremely aware of what the threats are. You jump at them and they take off, we're the same way. I mean, like we have, it's why you can get 100 positive comments, but the one negative one sticks with you because your nervous system reacts to that as if it was an attack.
Well, I mean, like, all right, so I think we're in a very good setting for this thought exercise. Like, you look around here, right? And it's like, oh, that's good. That all looks good. And it's like, oh, there is a large black bear looking very angry. I was right there.
Suddenly, all the rest goes away.
Ignore those blades of grass and that blue jay in the tree. Like, all that goes away. And it's like, oh, I'm focused on the threat. Like, that's how the brain works, as it should.
And so I think that what people are doing a lot of times when they're consuming this content, they're seeing the beauty, but if they can find one thing that doesn't align with all of the beauty, they're like, oh, the beauty must not be real.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and we're coming into an age where it's becoming even harder and harder, where like 10 years ago, people were like, oh, is that CGI or like Photoshop, and that picture might not be real. Now it's just like,
it's hard to know.
Everything can not be real. And so it's like, you just stop trusting everything as a result of it. And I think that's hard because it like diminishes the possibility for human communication and connection through creation of stuff. And it's just I think it's going to get harder and harder, particularly over the next decade. Like as you think about like, generative AI and what that does. And you think about like what Like, think about, like, you talk about all the body dysmorphia discussions that pop up as a result of Photoshop in, like, the 2000s and 2010s. This is, like, I think the next evolution of that. And it's going to be hard to, like, have good, honest conversations and be like, this is what our world and our life is like.
Yeah, for sure. So what do we say to the burgeoning homesteader that's dreaming of this, that has learned so much from content? This morning, Morgan and I are driving through the side-by-side through the misty pasture, and I was like, is it crazy to you that you just learned how to do this on the internet? Because he and I both are first generation, you know, growing food, raising animals. I had never been around cows or chickens or anything to speak of before I had them myself. And I have learned over the last 10 years how to do this. We go to conferences and I listen to people, and I was telling Morgan this morning, I do feel like an imposter a lot of times, because for so long, everything I was learning it the hard way. I was learning so much. I'd read all the books, but then I had to make hard lessons hands-on. And I'll sit and listen to people talk now, and I'll go, oh, wow, I actually do have my head around this. I'm actually successfully growing my food. I'm going through Morgan's pasture this morning. You have a beautiful setup with beautiful cattle, and it's organized, and you've got your system, and it's working. And I'm like, hey, you learned how to do this. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
What do we say to the person who's kind of stuck in the middle of, I need the internet because I need to learn how to do this. I don't have a community and camaraderie in real life. And that was what it was for me. I turned to the internet and Instagram friends because I didn't know anybody that was growing food. It made me feel normal.
Well, all right. So we were talking last night about, I think we were driving up here, about somebody who was like, you know, oh, you've got your electricity and you can watch, you know, Parks and Rec and eat ice cream. Like, good luck with what if the power goes out, like, or like the grid goes down, or we have an EMP or something, you know, wacky like that. And that idea of like, well, then does that mean I have to immediately live like that? Like, because I have to live at the lowest common denominator of what human sustenance requires? Or can I enjoy the resources and benefits that exist there, but just also recognize I got to kind of consume them responsibly, probably figure out what the right balance is. Like, and that's a hard conversation.
Plan. Yeah. You have a backup plan. I think that's wise to always have a plan. Like, you know, right now, if the modern system and the things you are relying on to keep all of these animals safe and fed and cared for and make this system function and meet the needs for you and your wife, if that was not available right now, you have a plan.
Yeah.
Anybody who has a farm has a plan of what they're going to do. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have to live like that right now.
You have to live that as your day-to-day. And I mean, but I think it's partially, too, when you think about, like, culture of, it's like, you got to go to an extreme.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, I can't just, like, say, either I'm completely vegan or I'm a carnivore.
Yeah.
And, like, it feels like in the last few years, like, being a good, healthy, balanced omnivore is, like, a lot less popular than it was, you know, through most of human history. Yeah. Because it's like, you know, you got to be one or the other. Yeah. And, like, and I think it comes down to that of, like, well, no, it's like, if I am only living my life through screens and I am spending 95% of my waking life just looking at some sort of glowing rectangle, that's not okay. That's not good. Right. You shouldn't do that. But also, I mean, and no offense to like Amish friends, right? Like saying that, oh, I shouldn't use any of that stuff because it makes me weak is, I think, very unhealthy, and you're setting yourself up for a lot more hardship and failure than you need to. And so it's like, just try to like emphasizing finding balance. That's the right balance for you, which might be different than the balance for me or different for you listening, whoever.
Our systems are massively different because I have a bunch of children and you don't have any. Yeah, no. Like, that changes massively, one, what you need to produce, the time that you have. Like, it changes everything. I
mean, you saw our garden, right? Like, so, you know, we get most of our vegetables, you know, at least, especially these times of year, like from, I don't know, it's like, I think 60 by 25 foot, you know, garden space. That's where,
and it's got flowers and beautiful stuff in it. It's not like you're not trying to like eke the most efficiency out of it.
Right. We don't need like, you know, 24 beds and 3 high. Like, that's just not what we need. Like, and it's just matched to what you have versus what you feel like the benchmark that everybody else is doing. Then you got to do that too.
And I would love to be able to say to anybody like, hey, you can have the diving off point of anybody that you're learning from. I think that being able to go to the internet and learn, I mean, we wouldn't be seeing the homesteading movement that we're seeing right now if it weren't for that, because a lot of these things were lost.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't have anybody that I could go to and learn in real life, you know, like I had to turn to the internet. I learned how to pressure can on FaceTime with a girl I'd met on Instagram. Like I totally love the online community for that. But in an algorithm pushed world, you have to have the awareness that extremes get clicks and therefore you're going to see them more.
Completely.
I mean,
that's, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Like,
as long as you know it, it's fine.
Like, because I mean, I think that's the other struggle where it's like, you know, I'll talk to people all the time who ask for advice, like around content creation. Like, how do I get people to pay attention to this? How do I do that? And I'll be like, oh, well, you got to like tweak your thumbnail. You got to think about your first 15 seconds differently. You got to like, and I'll get into all the technical stuff that I feel like I've learned over the years that has made me a pretty good YouTuber.
Yeah.
And they get like almost repulsed by it because they're like, well, I don't want to do all of that. That feels like clickbait. I don't. And it's like, yeah, but like that's much like how do you take care of a dairy cow?
Right.
There's things that generally work that you do. And
well, I've had many people be like, why do you make titles that say, I found this in the barn instead of saying, I found a snake in the barn, you know? And why do newspaper articles start with a hook? Why is it important the first paragraph of a book? Why does the title matter? Why does the cover of a book matter? Why, you know, it wouldn't, a lot of the New York Times bestsellers wouldn't be had they put it on the shelf with a brown paper cover that said a book about cats, you know, like, I mean, it just wouldn't have been there. Whereas, you know, Puss in Boots, it goes somewhere, you know, like it's just, why do we present any media the way that we do? It's because we want it to have reach. Now, within that, I mean, you operate in integrity. Like, you want to be honest. You hold yourself to that standard that...
Can you call this episode balance? Like, balance is the most important thing, which is not balance. Like, but I mean, like, it's that.
But because so much of what we do isn't seen, it's not understood. It's not, I mean, people are like, oh, you work on your farm full time. I'm like, I do. I mean, I'm on a computer way more than I'm, you know, doing farm chores.
Yeah. I mean, and it's just, how do you talk about it? I mean, I think for folks who are listening to this, who might even be like, oh, these guys are just like way too into their head in this conversation. I think, probably. But on top of that, there is this reality that I think it's a dilemma that more people face. It probably just looks a little different.
Yeah.
But like, how do you, you know, again, feel like you're living in a real physical world and being authentic, but at the same time recognize the like world and society and construct that we're in right now has other aspects to it.
Yeah. I think for me, I do think in my head a lot about this, and people will be like, it's not that big a deal. And I'm like, I don't know, because you get all these comments. Yeah. But for me, I want people to know, like, hey, the fact that you're going to your job or your husband's going to his job while you take care of your farm or vice versa, or whatever the dynamic is, like, we're not doing anything any different. Like, it's the same thing. I mean, we have our money earning situation plus our farm situation. Ours happens to overlap more than maybe everybody else's does. But being able to look at your food growing goals and pursue the version of this life that works with the season you're in is so worth it.
Well, and I think part of it too is having friends to talk to you about it.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, and I think sometimes the friends that you think on paper should be more like you would be able to identify probably aren't. Like you're a mother of 6 living in South Carolina. Like, wait a minute, why are we such good friends and we feel like we're in the very same situation? Well, yeah, those vectors don't matter, but like, the way we earn our livings and what we do and like what we're passionate about, there's a ton of overlap. And so that works. And so to have a friend where you can like hop on a phone call every week and just like, you know, kind of talk about like the stresses and things you're feeling, like there's such value in that and just being able to find those people. And, you know, I have different friends, like my best friend since I was 10, he and I will talk very regularly too. And it's not even remotely a single topic that you and I will touch on. And that's okay. And so it's just like you find these different relationships that you can like express it with another human. And it's amazing how it will take shame, it will take anxiety, it will take like uncertainty so much off your shoulders and become such a relief because you have that other person you can share that connection with.
That's so good. So this is a little bit of a subject change, and I know that this is a little long, but they don't mind.
We're just hanging in the pasture today. That was the plan.
So this is jumping into a different subject that I just have to talk with Morgan, because I do tend to attract a creative bunch. I think that my viewers, like when I talk to the people who listen to my podcast, who watch my videos, they would really relate to this thing that I think you and I really relate on. The thing that the Homestead so provides for me, and content creation also provides for me, is that I have to create. Like, and we were talking about this yesterday, because I know you're very much like that. Like, what would you, let's speak to that value. You know, when we talk about the value of growing your food for that, but the Homestead life also gives this avenue that even if you are working a corporate job or whatever, you're a baseball mom or whatever thing that you're balancing with it, it's almost like this outlet daily that even if I spend 2 or 3 hours on my farm, it satisfies my need to be a creator.
Yeah.
To steward something, to care for something.
Well, it's getting in touch with your human needs. Like let me tell you a story. So growing up as a kid, I love drawing comics, and like my happiest memories, some of my happiest memories are like sitting in my room, listening to punk rock records and drawing comics that I would then Xerox and give to people. And as I went to college, I went to art school, and creation was a huge part of that. And a lot of my friend group was centered around that. And then as I got out and had to earn a living, I got very focused on the creation of actually the work that I was doing.
Yeah.
But by the time I got to like my mid 30s and I was living in Washington, D.C. and had just been promoted to a really big job where my job was now to sit in meetings, and my job was to manage politics, and my job was to do all those things. It was the most depressed I ever was in my entire life. And it was very much a personal low point because I felt so lonely, so isolated, and so unfulfilled. And a huge part of that had to do with not creating. And it was that actually that inspired me to first start ripping up the front yard of my row house and start growing vegetables and researching things like permaculture and regenerative agriculture. But then that was all good because it was doing something in the physical, tangible world, and to your point, nurturing, satisfied a part of my brain that I wasn't even all that in touch with at the time. That I need to nurture things. That's for me, that's good. Yeah. I was starting to do that, but then as I started to make videos about what I was doing, or even just blog posts to share with my family of hey, here's what we're doing with this farm we just bought in Vermont. I was really the creative expression is rekindling this thing that felt like it's been dead for the last decade. Yeah. And it's making me happier. And the fact that it's those two things working together, for me to find personal fulfillment, I need to be able to nurture, and I need to be able to create and express. And being able to live a life where I can do that, for me personally, that's the recipe. And so even if I look at my life today, if I were to win the lottery tomorrow, and I've said this to you many times, I would maybe buy the farm next door. Yeah. I might have some fancier equipment or fix up the old barn. I might not do as many sponsored videos. Yeah. But other than that, my life would basically look identical to what we've been experiencing this morning, where it's I get up, I hang out with some friends, I can go write, I can go make a video. That is what I want to do because I need those parts to feel fulfillment in my life. And so for people, maybe you're not like me, maybe you don't need to create, but it's getting in touch with those things that are going to give you a sense of fulfillment and making sure you can have a piece of that in the balance of your day to day. I think that's such an important part of the recipe. I personally think everybody probably has the desire to create. I think that being so tied to such a consumeristic society that literally trains us to be consumers can squash that. But that's the beauty that I see come out in people when they start this life, is it's almost even sometimes a sleeping part of them gets woken up of oh, I am a creator. Yeah. And right now, I get asked a lot for people who are is it too late for me to YouTube? And I'm no. You want to make content, you can make content. Now, when people, what they mean is, well, can I make a full-time job out of it? I don't know. It is a really saturated niche. You have to be willing to treat it like your job, and it's a risk. You may put a lot of work in something and never really take off. But the people I think who are the most successful
in content creation are people who are creating because they must. You know, like it's coming out of a place of, it's an overflow thing. Like they're creating out of the love for their farm. They're creating out of their desire to help people and teach people. They're creating because they're creators.
Yeah.
You know, I think that if you come to content creation with that consumeristic mindset of I'm going to do this to get what I need, it's going to lack the thing that people are ultimately looking for. I don't know. This has been like something I've thought about a lot this year as we've dealt with a ton of, honestly, overwhelm and just loss. And I mean, you know, all the details this summer has been really hard. But I really started looking at every area in my life and I'm like, I can only do so much. There is a limit. I have a capacity. And while I love making things for people, I don't want to make anything that's just for the sake of it being consumed. I don't want to make content just because, oh, this is the content that'll be consumed. That's the extreme stuff. That's why people are making that stuff. Is a lot of times, not everybody, but a lot of times it's like, I'm going to make this so extreme that it's going to get hundreds of thousands of views. And it's not healthy. Like a lot of that stuff is perpetuating fear. It's keeping people in the idea of some unrealistic expectation. And my thing is I want to create something that's going to inspire other people to create too. I want to create out of a place that is an overflow of my heart, that it has the seeds in it that it would cause other people's hearts to overflow, you know, because I think that's ultimately how you break down all of these false expectations and this idea that's going to leave people disappointed in their life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a part of it, and like the purpose and what you want to inspire can be one aspect of it. I think though, like for some people who are stuck and who are like out of the practice of creation, the biggest thing is to like almost go back to being like a 4-year-old kid with a pack of crayons or a little plastic thing of Play-Doh. And like, you know, what are you making? What are you doing? And why are you even doing that? And you're doing it because drawing that dog or making the snakes out of Play-Doh brings you joy just in the act of doing that. And I think for folks who want to do content creation but are struggling and are like saying, oh, I want to do this, I think the more you can just actually experiment and forget algorithms, forget like what's going to perform or not, just try to find those moments that give you that feeling. And then build on that and then see if that could resonate with other people if you do it a certain way. And like, then you can start to explore those other things. But if you don't have that identified thing of what actually just brings you joy, like for you, I'm going to use you as the example because I know you and I think your audience will like be like, oh yeah, that is how she's like. Showing people the beauty of something is like, that is one of your highest values. It's paramount. And so everything you do, whether it is a podcast or a video or just taking a picture or writing a poem, like each of those things, you're trying to take a moment of beauty that you've witnessed with your eye and share with somebody else. And that's why you do it. For me, it's like something of a different idea or a different way to look at the world and like helping other people see it. And like, they're just a different motive of inspiration, but they like are what fuel us as creators. I think for anybody out there to really do that audit and really say, what is the thing that you do? And like, when you were that kid with the pack of the crayons, what was the thing bringing you joy? And let that serve as the jumping off point. I think that's the exercise to undergo to like try to get where you want to go.
100%. I think that's so valuable. And I know I've got so many people that follow me that started their Instagram, started their blog, started their YouTube channel, and they get discouraged, you know, or it's going well and it's going great, but then it's an ebb and flow. You know, we all have those moments as content creators. Does everybody, what is it? Nobody likes me anymore.
I know, when we're talking about like, oh God, I'm horrible. I've done so many repulsive things on camera at this point. How could anybody want to like follow this account? What the heck's wrong with me?
So it's just, there's this ebb and flow, but if you can always anchor back down to, what do I want to show the world? And the beautiful thing about this life is like, it's worthy of being shared. I mean, like, I love being able to share this with people. And it brings us back to the beginning. I didn't start sharing this because I wanted to paint some unrealistic picture. I didn't start sharing this because I wanted, you know, like, I really started sharing it out of the love of it.
I kind of as I went down the regenerative rabbit hole and like was learning so much stuff, I was like, this is amazing. Why doesn't everybody know about this? And like wanting to share that with other people or like the mistakes I was making and the lessons learning from that. It's like, why can't everybody see that? Like, that's what got me going to it. It's the same thing. And so it's like, how do you identify that? Because, I mean, here's another story for you. Like, we're so driven by the people that inspire us, right? Like somebody who might see your stuff and say, oh, I want to make videos like she does. And like, so you start creating like that person, which is actually a really good way to practice and learn those skills. But if all you're ever doing is that carbon copy, it never goes. Like when I was a kid, I loved Matt Groening and The Simpsons and his like Life in Hell, like comic series. Like that's what inspired me. And like, so I would be like 10 years old tracing those comics, and like that would become my comics, and I'd like make my own things to it, or I'd like start drawing characters that looked like basically derivative of what they did. And like, that was how I got started. But then as I mature and find my own voice, I add my own element. I add like who I am and my personality, and that's where you go from it. And so it's like, yeah, taking those sources of information, but then also like really saying, well, what are the things that are you? And every person is different. Every person got that unique way to tell a story or think about something. And so how do you add that flavor to it? I think that's the other challenge.
And here's what I imagine, okay? Like with the topics we're talking about, I said it was an unrelated subject change, but I think they're actually very related. When we talk about having the mindset of just like going and buying the packages of food at the store and never giving a second thought to where your food comes from, you know, doing a job and never giving a second thought to what actually fulfills you, making a home and, you know, constantly looking at somebody else and never giving a second thought to what actually your expression should be. I think the only way to actually bring real solution to the broken world we live in is for each person to wrap their head around these ideas and make home and food and enjoyment and creation from their expression. Like, think about this. If it wasn't the expectation, well, everybody needs to quit working and go live on a farm. Like, that wouldn't work. No. Like, so you can't have a society like that. But what if it was very normal for people who wore business suits during the day to put on their garden shoes in the evening and go out to their little garden? You know, like, what if you're never going to garden, but you love baking the bread that looks like it came out of the French bakery? Like, what if, like, each person said, this is actually my piece, and did it, instead of throwing their hands up because they couldn't do somebody else's piece? Like, that, I think, is where we actually could see a lot of healing in our society and our bodies and our families and our homes and the way we do food and the earth. And, you know, I mean, like, what we're doing is not sustainable. But what would be sustainable is for everybody to find the expression that works for them and be willing to change it when their season changes. Yeah.
I mean, the way I like to talk about it is it's like finding a way to anchor yourself in the physical world.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, you know me, like I love gadgets and technology and gizmos. My favorite like new gadget I've purchased in the last year is the Apple Vision Pro, which if you guys have never seen it, it's basically a headset that you put on. Actually, have you tried it? But it's like a big headset you put on your head, and it's like a computer for your face, and like you can immerse yourself in other worlds, or you can put up like a computer screen that's 15 feet big right in front of you, and that's what you interact with. You don't physically touch anything. You're just looking and like pinching your fingers, basically. And I love that. But I also know that if I don't spend a significant portion of my day interacting with the physical world, building something, tending to animals, like cutting down trees or putting up fence posts or just physically interacting with the world, my life's out of balance. And so I put it as, it's like, not everybody has to grow food. Not everybody should move out to a farm. It's not even practical. But I think everybody needs to think about a portion of their day where they're interacting with the physical world and like anchoring there. Because the more and more we look at all of those glowing rectangles, the harder and harder it gets to be. Like, you know, last weekend my nephews were up here and they're, 9 and 5. And, oh man, I don't want to bag on iPad kids, but like, it's like, you can see it that like they need like that like video stimulation so much that like trying to get them to come out here. And like, actually I got both of them for the first time ever driving the side by side. And it was like the greatest thing in the world for them. And they're realizing, oh, wow, it's kind of like a video game, but it's actually the physical world of moving the wheel. And this happens and there's a consequence to it. Like the more we can inspire that physical world interaction, I think that's where some of that magic happens.
That's so good. Well, I think we gave everybody a lot to chew on.
I know. I mean, hopefully that. They're like really confused and like, oh gosh, what did we just listen to for the last half hour or whatever this has been?
This is why Morgan and I talk so much every week, because we process through all these things. And I mean, it does feel like a big responsibility to me to be the depiction that some people are seeing. I mean, we're helping people visualize their dreams by showing them what has happened in our life, what has, what our foggy mornings, like our moments really helps people frame their dreams. But I also want to come in and whisper in their ear, like, hey, use this as a diving board, but also find what works for you. Because, I mean, like, even right now, we're changing things this summer, like we're paring back and we're adjusting. I'm recognizing the season of my life. And I just want to encourage people, like, let's make our expression of homesteading, like, just, it's okay. It's not yes or no.
Well, and I know you're probably trying to do the wrap up, and I'm going to throw another thing out here, but like, I think like collectively, we all need to talk about life cycles in a healthier way and recognize that there are times. I mean, you actually do well. You're sort of the season of life language that you often use, but everything has a cycle. Yeah. And the more you can decline or act like that's not true, the more I think unhealthy your relationship's going to be with the world. But like recognizing that there is growth, there is creation, there is rise, there is like decline, there is death, there is shrinkage, and like realize that that's a part of it, and not panic when you're seeing it, but just actually turn your attention to kind of where do things go. Like I think that like, I don't know, particularly in Western culture, like that's a harder thing for us to collectively get around, because it's like death has such a finality to it. Yeah. But I think like if there's anything I've learned from farm life over the last 6 years, it's that no, death is equally important as life. And
we don't have life without death.
And like you can't have good soil if you're not killing the plants that are currently in the soil and then letting new plants grow up in its place. Like that's just how it works. And like, so get more comfortable and recognize where you are in whatever cycle you are in your life and whatever that thing you're doing is. Yeah.
Embracing where you are right now. Yeah. And doing what you can right now and making the most of it. Because that's the thing that I've really settled on this summer with, you were mentioning like about July of this summer, Morgan was like, yeah, you got this mantra. I have 10 years left, because basically my oldest son went to college and I had the gross awakening of how fast a childhood goes by. And my youngest son will graduate in 9 years. And so it has been this thing for me of like, I don't care about anything else right now. Like I still want to grow our food and I still want to do what I do, but not at any expense of enjoying this very brief time I have left with my children under my roof and, dependent on me as dependent minors. And that is, I'm making adjustments to free up time to be able to be more present with my children, because I had an awareness of the stage I'm in that required some adjustment. And I'm still a homesteader. I'm still a content creator. I'm a mother. I'll write poems. I'll marvel in beauty. I'll share it with people, but it's going to look different than it did a few years ago. And I'm okay with that, because it's healthy.
But if you weren't conscious of where you're at in the cycle,
I'd try to power through.
Or you're like, I'll be a mom forever, or I'll be a mom to kids forever. Like, no, you're not. Like, that's just factually inaccurate. And
they won't be false. Kids forever. They're going to become adults, and the dynamic's going to change. And I don't know. I think that awareness is honestly the thing that makes us the most resilient. So yeah. All right. Thank you, Morgan.
Absolutely.
Y'all
anytime.
Check out my friend Morgan's channels, and he's awesome. And we're going to have a really great day pressing some apples and enjoying.
Yeah, we're making cider today. Both fresh and hard. And we'll grow apple trees off the back of it.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Y'all, thank you for hanging out with us today. God bless you. Until next time.
Round and around we go. Yep. Making everybody sick and dizzy at home.
It's so good.
Isn't it though? It's like the most intense apple experience you could have.